Hello and welcome to CIPD Assessment Review with HRC Online. My name is James Dean. I'm CEO and founder of HRC Online, and in this assessment review, we're going to be looking at the CIPD Level 5 5002, which is evidence-based practice. Now, this is probably one of those units where if you work in Excel a lot, you're like, yeah, easy, I can really get on with this. If you're not using Excel all the time, then you might find elements of this a little bit of a struggle. And we'll go through the units that I think we're gonna work through, and I'll even show you some of the ways that I would build sort of tables and graphics and stuff like that without giving you the answers to the questions, because I can't give you the answers to the questions. So let's dive in, let's go through the assessment, let's pull out the relevant information that we need to see on it, and then we'll progress from there. So as always, preparation for the assessment is as follows. At the start of your assignment, you're encouraged to plan your assessment work with your assessor and, where appropriate, agree milestones so that you can help you monitor your progress. Refer to the indicative content in the unit guide to support your evidence. Pay attention to how your evidence is presented. Very important in this particular unit because obviously they ask for graphics and bits and pieces as well. And remember, you are working in a people practice team. So even if you're not working in HR at the moment, imagine you are. It's that ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, because level 5 is all about critical evaluation. Ensure that the evidence generated for this assignment remains all your own work, and there are new signatures, AI scans going on. If something feels wrong, you may be asked to rewrite it, you may be asked to reapproach it and stuff like that, because we have seen a bit of a spike in that. So just be careful in terms of your spelling and grammar checkers, because some of those now start to use generative AI when they rewrite sentences for you, and those can come up on plagiarism and AI scans, and then you might get your work knocked back. So you're not going to fail because your English is terrible. You're not going to fail because you've misspelt a word, but you could fail if you run it through a generative AI spell check and it rewrites the words for you, and then it'll flag up in the plagiarism. So just be careful in terms of what you use. I use Grammarly. I don't use the generate it. I don't use improve it. I just use it for the spelling and grammar. That's how I do it. I'm a dyslexic, so I do use software, but just be careful in how you approach it. Right. Anyway, task 1 is a briefing paper. So what you're going to be doing in task 1 is, see if we've got the scenario. Your manager has asked you to complete a briefing paper for her to give to a visiting team of people practice graduates who are particularly interested in how evidence-based practice is used in the context of people practices. The content needs to give them a critical insight into what evidence-based practice it is and how it's relevant to people professionals. She has also asked you to include practical examples of the type of data analysis that people professionals use. The clever part in this is include practical examples. This is where you're referencing your citations, your evidence-based practice really kicks into fun. Now, the part 1 is 1 to 7 questions, approximately 2,900 words in total. CIPD say you can go 10% over, 10% under. If you break it either side, instantaneous refer on that assessment, or fail, depending on what words you send to use. So you have around about 415 words per question, which is relatively generous for CIPD. You should relate academic concepts, theories, and professional practice throughout the briefing paper. Ensure that your work is critical and informed by using key academic concepts, articles, and relevant publications. All cited references used should be taken from credible sources and should be correctly acknowledged, presented in a full bibliography at the end of your briefing paper. Now, this is something new CIPD have thrown in this assessment brief, and the reason for it is there are some terrible, terrible, terrible locations for references. Indeed.com. Most of it's generative AI, most of it's created for SEO rankings, most of it's not actually critical evaluation. It doesn't have an author, it's not had someone that's published it. So that's not a really good one. LinkedIn, a lot of them are generative AI, the generative AI articles that are being created and stuff like that. So that's not a credible source. So if you're using theories, concepts, think CIPD love CIPD. I'll say it a lot. CIPD loves CIPD. I like CIPD. I like AIHR. That's the Australian governing body. They do some really interesting work, especially around data and analytics. I think they're particularly good in this instance. And then a lot of it is theory. So MindWorks is a really good one, but you only get access to a couple of articles a month. So just think about where you're going to source your information from. Where possible, CIPD loves CIPD. So I would go with CIPD where you can. Right. So let's kick into it. Questions 1 to 3. Question 1, evaluate the concept of evidence-based practice, including how approaches to evidence-based practice can be used to provide insight that supports sound decision-making across people, practices, and organizational issues. Evaluate one appropriate analysis tool and one appropriate analysis method that might be applied by organizations even, to recognize and diagnose issues, challenges, and opportunities. Now, that is a cheeky, multi-layered question, which we'll break up in a second. Explain the main principles of critical thinking, including how these might apply to your own and others' ideas to assist objective and rational debate, which also quite a tricky question, because you're going to be like, well, what are the main principles? And then you'll look into it, and there's like 7 principles, 5 principles, 9 principles, 15 principles. So again, read the ones that are relevant to you, read the ones that sing to you most. I will try and fix my camera. Bear with me a second. Just make sure, if you are going to use the principles and things like that of critical thinking, CIPD loves CIPD, but also academic theories, academic papers, academic created content is critical for these types of things. So, as we always do, let's highlight the key elements and break down these questions 1 to 3. Evaluate, explain. They're your 3 verbs. You have to address the question on a verb level. So, evaluation, pros, cons. Evaluation, pros, cons. Explain. Nice and simple. You just explain what it is. So if you look at AC 1.1, you've got to evaluate the concept of evidence-based practice. So evaluation of what evidence-based practice is, what's good about it, what's bad about it. Provide insight that supports sound decision making. So how do you use evidence-based practice? What is the benefit of evidence-based decision making, basically? And how does it support evidence-based decision making? So I could tell you right now that the earth is flat, as an example, and you might go, well, no, James, it's not. And I'll go, prove it. And you'll go, here are a billion images from a billion reputable sources. And I'll go, okay. Just as a really random example in terms of how you would do that. So if someone says, for example, reward has no benefit on employee engagement, then how would you go about making that decision? How you provide insight? How do you do evaluations of people with that? Surveys, focus groups, collection of data, performance of the organization over when it's been active in terms of a reward and when it's not been active. So there are multiple things that you can do to sort of approach that. Evaluate one appropriate analysis tool, one appropriate analysis method. Okay, so you're looking at the pros and cons of an analysis tool. You're looking at the pros and cons of an analysis method. I'm realizing my camera's a bit jumpy. That might be applied to an organization to recognize and diagnose issues, challenges, and opportunities. So there are multiple elements that you're going to need to do with this particular assessment. Now, pause. So this part's tricky. Evaluate one appropriate analysis tool, one appropriate analysis method. So the benefit of one, the pros and cons of one analysis tool, the pros and cons of one analysis method, and how you would use it to diagnose issues, challenges, and opportunities. So when you lay out this work, analysis tool, make sure you use the word issues, challenges, opportunities, analysis method, issues, challenges, opportunities. You're probably going to need to put more than 400 words to this, but the next question, AC 1.3, is a little bit more simple. So you can probably steal a couple of words from this, which is explain the principles. So that's multiple, cheeky S, CIPD love a cheeky S, of critical thinking, including how these might apply to your own and others' ideas. So again, multiple principles, how it applies to your own and then other people's ideas to assist in objective and rational debate. Now, I'm of the opinion debate is positive in the workplace. Debate isn't a bad word. It can just create bad habits. And if you can have positive disagreement in the workplace that's around evidence-based practice, that's a really good thing. So that's what they're trying to sort of push you in the thing of questions 1 to 3. Right. So let's move on to the next set of questions, which is explain 2 decision-making processes for achieving effective outcomes. Assess how 2 different ethical perspectives can be used to inform and influence moral decision making. Appraise 2 different ways organizations measure financial and non-financial performance, providing 1 example for each. Explain how people practices add value in organizations and identify 2 methods that might be used to measure the impact of people practices. So this is a chunky set of questions with loads of different verbs, loads of different approaches, loads of different expectations. And let's sort of break through them. So explain. Really simple, 2 decision-making processes for achieving effective outcomes. So a decision-making process may be pros and cons list. How does that do an effective outcome? A decision-making process may be a vote. How does that create an effective outcome? So explain 2 decision-making process. Tossing a coin, is that effective outcome? Probably not. Whereas if you do a decision tree, if you do a cost benefit analysis, if you do something in terms of savings and stuff like that, then that probably does have an effective outcome. So think about how you make decisions for effective outcomes. How do you save the company money? How do you progress the company in different ways? What would you do to fix a problem? And try to think of a problem for this. So if, for example, it was changing number of days annual leave and giving people more, how would you come to that decision? How do you get the effective outcome from that? What would you be doing? Would you lose less staff? Is your turnover down? How do you evidence that? What do you do? Now, assess is the next one. So that's your next verb. So assess, you're looking at 2 different ethical perspectives. So you're trying to just sort of understand them in more and how it can be used to inform and influence moral decision making. So this is a really critical part as well. Moral decision making and decision making are 2 very separate things. So you might make a decision and it doesn't necessarily feel moral, even if it's within the bounds of the law. So how does it inform and influence? So think about ethical perspectives, think about the ethical approaches, think about how you would come together and how does it inform those. The next is appraise 2 different ways organizations measure financial and non-financial performance. So that's 2 ways for financial performance, that's 2 ways for non-financial performance, providing 1 example for each. So if you take that question, you've got to go appraise, which is looking at the quality of something, 2 different ways organizations measure financial and non-financial performance, providing 1 example for each. So if you're looking at the quality of how does it approach financial performance when it comes to um, a really good cost of recruitment. So how does it measure financial performance for cost of recruitment? How does it measure the non-financial performance, which is how quick people embed within the organization, the onboarding process? Provide 1 example for each and explain those. So again, make sure that you build out the question in the different ways organization. So method 1, financial performance, non-financial performance example for each. So non-financial performance example, financial performance example, and then do that twice. So again, that's a pretty chunky question. You're going to need a good few words for that. And you're going to need some evidence base. When we talk about evidence base for questions like this, financial, non-financial performance, this is where I would dig into case studies. Case studies are probably the best way that you can get a really big depth of understanding for a particular question and really sort of build out your answer and make it nice and chunky. So always look for case studies, always look for things that have been published, because that will help you explain the difference between the 2, because it's got an evidence base of both sides. Now, the final question is explain how people practice add value in an organization and identify 2 methods that might be used to measure the impact of people professionals. Now, that could be anything from staff turnover rate, it could be anything from sick days, it could be anything from training and development, it could be anything from mandatory training, GDPR breaches. Think about how you at this moment in time could add value to your organizations and how do you evidence it? And that's the critical thing that you need to think about. Okay. So this is part 1. Part 2 gets a little bit more complicated. And if you are struggling with any of this, if you're not enrolled with HRC Online, if you're watching this on YouTube and stuff like that, in October we are launching CIPD, October 2024. Don't know when you'll be watching this. We are launching CIPD Bite Size. This is where we create a series of short videos against every AC. And every AC, what we will do is we'll break down the verb, we'll break the question down into action points, a little bit like what we've done here, but with more depth to it. We will then give you some external references and case studies and examples that we think you should go dig into and look into that will help you build out your answer. And then to really help you sort of bring it all together, we will give you a fictitious scenario and we'll sort of explain a bit of a story, because storytelling helps people understand and come at it from a different angle. We will also be putting these in our CIPD, in our HRC Online community, so that you can actually go into the community, speak to other learners that are studying bite size, ask questions. We will also be implementing questions to help with the comprehension of that as well, so that you're able to sort of come at this question from multiple different ways. CIPD Bite Size goes live in October 2024. So if you are struggling with this in your center and this is the brief that you're working from, CIPD Bite Size might be the additional thing that you need to help you get through the studies. And a link will be in the description of this video so that you can actually find it. You can also join our free community as well, so that you can ask questions with us, our learning coaches, myself, and we do different bits and pieces of that as well. So don't worry, like I said, we make these videos free support so that we can help you achieve what you need with the qualification, but also CIPD Bite Size is coming, and that will also help you with this if you are particularly struggling, because I know some people do struggle with this particular type of unit. Now, task 2, and I'm going to look at the questions for task 2, because in task 2 of your briefing paper, using table 1 and table 2 below, you should provide examples of the type of data analysis that people practitioners use in AC 1.1, AC 2.1, AC 2.2, and AC 2.3. Your evidence must consist of quantitative and qualitative analysis review in 1,000 words. This is around about 333 words per question. However, you need to put together some tables and graphics. It does state that in the questions, and it's something that you need to be aware of. So table 1 is performance data. Table 1 provides performance review judgments for your employees from 4 departments, completed across 2 quarters. Each individual employee's performance outcome is indicated by one of 4 criteria below: outstanding, meet set individual key performance indicators, not quite there yet, and underperforming. Present each department's performance review judgments as a percentage. Those gaining outstanding are entitled to a 4% bonus payment each year. Calculate the bonus due for each of the employees for the quarter, and then provide an overall total cost for the bonus payments for the organization. Present your findings from table 1 using a minimum of 3 appropriate diagram forms. Diagrammatical. Anyway, and make justified recommendations based on your evaluation. So you need to create 3 tables as a minimum, and then in your 1,000 words, you need to be explaining what that means. So I'm going to look at what I'm going to do is let's bring up the data, let's bring up the information, so that we can I can show you how I would approach this, how I would create a pivot table out of it, so that you can start to create some tables, some graphics, and you can start to do some of the calculations.